Hey, my name is Damian Price, 30 years old. I work maintenance for a property management company during the day and pick up side jobs in the evenings, fixing wiring, patching roofs, unclogging pipes for the neighbors on Maple Row. It's enough to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. I don't need much more than that anymore. That evening, the black sedan turned onto our street. I knew it didn't belong here. Maple Row sits on the edge of the city where the asphalt is cracked in long, jagged lines, and the chain-link fences have rusted into the color of dried blood. Most cars on this block are 10-year-old pickups or delivery vans with faded lettering. The sedan that rolled to a stop in front of my house was too clean, too quiet, too expensive. It looked like it had never seen a pothole in its life. I was standing on the porch with a dish towel in my hand when the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. She looked about 29, maybe 30. Dark tailored coat over a simple blouse and slacks. No assistant, no lawyer, no security. Just a small leather bag and a tension in her shoulders she was trying hard to hide behind a calm walk. She stopped at the bottom of the cracked concrete steps and looked straight at me. "My name is Celeste Rohr," she said. "My father has passed, but I came here to pay the debt he left behind." I tightened my grip on the towel until my knuckles went white. I knew the name, Victor Rohr, founder and former CEO of Rohr Meridian, the construction conglomerate that had built half the new infrastructure in the city over the last 15 years. 6 years ago, I had been a safety engineer on one of their biggest projects, the East Vale Bridge. 24 years old, youngest safety supervisor on site, fresh off a technical scholarship, and too many nights studying code books under work lights. I believed back then that if you did your job right, the system would protect you. I was wrong. I had found the diagonal cracks on 3 load-bearing piers on the eastern span during a routine morning inspection. They weren't surface crazing, they were structural. I photographed every inch, measured the widths, wrote a 4-page report, and recommended an immediate stop work order until an independent structural engineer could evaluate the concrete mix. I uploaded the report to the internal system, printed a copy for the project manager, and sent another by certified mail to the regional safety board. No one responded. 2 days later, the project manager called me into the temporary office trailer and told me their in-house team had reviewed the piers and declared them within acceptable limits. When I asked to see that review, he said the documents were company property. I kept pushing. 2 weeks later, a section of scaffolding on the same eastern span collapsed during a shift change. 4 men were injured. The project shut down for 8 months. I expected the investigation to clear my name. My report had warned them. The report disappeared. The copy on the company server was gone. The safety board claimed they never received the certified letter. Even the duplicate I kept in the locked drawer at home vanished after someone broke in one night and took nothing else. No cash, no electronics, just that single folder. The final investigation report described me as the safety engineer who had failed to identify clear warning signs. I was fired. My certification was suspended pending review that never came. Word spread quietly through the big contractors in the region. No one would hire me for anything above basic labor. Around the same time, my wife Alina was fighting a severe autoimmune disease. We had been married just over a year. When I lost the job, we lost the health insurance that came with it. I sold the car, drained our savings, worked nights in a warehouse, and took every repair job I could find. It still wasn't enough. She died 14 months after I was let go. I don't blame Victor Rohr for her illness, but I will never pretend that being shoved to the bottom at the exact moment she needed treatment most didn't make everything worse. Since then, I have lived alone in this small house on Maple Row. I go to work, come home, fix things for other people, and try not to think too far ahead. I stopped believing in fairness a long time ago. I believe in rent, electric bills, and showing up the next morning. So when Celeste Rohr stood at the bottom of my steps and said she had come to settle her father's debt, I felt nothing warm. "What debt?" I asked, voice flat. She told me Victor Rohr had died of a stroke 8 weeks earlier. After the funeral, the lawyers opened a hidden safe behind the paneling in his private office. Inside, they found a file labeled East Vale. My original warning report was there. So was an independent structural assessment confirming the 3 piers were compromised. And a memo Victor Rohr had written 3 days before the collapse, instructing his people to keep the schedule and adjust documentation later if necessary. I didn't invite her inside. I walked down one step and kept the distance. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's the truth," she said. "There are a lot of truths in the world. People with billions don't drive to this neighborhood just to tell one of them." She didn't look away. She said she wanted to release the documents publicly, reopen the investigation, and clear my professional record. She knew it would cost Roar Meridian money, tank the stock price, and probably get her removed as the new CEO. I asked what she and the company stood to gain. "Nothing," she answered. "The company will pay, so will I." I didn't believe her, not yet. An apology couldn't give me back 6 years. It couldn't bring back the work, the reputation, or Alina. I looked at the expensive car parked at the curb and said, "You can lose a title and still have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. I only have this house. If this gets dug up and then buried again, I lose the last thing I own." Celeste was quiet for a few seconds. "I understand that what we stand to lose isn't the same. You don't understand it by standing on my porch for 5 minutes." She didn't argue. Finally, I pointed at the lowest step. "You can sit there and tell me everything you know, but you're not coming inside." Celeste sat. We talked for almost 2 hours that afternoon. I didn't make any decisions. When she finally drove away, I still didn't know whether she was truly trying to fix what her father had done or whether this was simply a more sophisticated play. But for the first time in 6 years, I knew my report still existed somewhere. And somewhere inside a safe that had belonged to the man who destroyed me, the truth had been waiting all this time. The next week, Celeste came back 3 times. She always arrived late in the afternoon, alone, and parked the black sedan a little farther down the street so it wouldn't sit right in front of my house. She never brought contracts or checks or anything that looked like an offer. She just carried a small bag and sat on the lowest step while I stayed on the top one. The space between us felt exactly right, like 2 people standing on opposite sides of a hole someone else had dug. On the second visit, she brought a copy of my original report. I recognized every photograph, every measurement, even the small typo I had made in the last paragraph. I thought I had forgotten the details, but the moment I held the pages, the morning came back to me in full. Sitting in the company truck on the job site, typing with cold fingers, knowing even then that no one wanted to read what I had written. I held the papers for a long time without speaking. "Did you verify these?" I asked. She nodded. She had hired an independent forensic examiner to check the ink, the paper, the metadata on the digital files, and cross-referenced everything with city records. Everything matched. The documents were real. I asked why Victor Rohr had kept evidence that could destroy him. Celeste said she didn't know. Maybe guilt. Maybe insurance against the rest of the board turning on him one day. I didn't care about his reasons anymore. The only thing that mattered was that the proof had survived. Word traveled fast on Maple Row. Mr. Leon, who ran the corner grocery, stopped me when I went in for bread one evening. He leaned across the counter and lowered his voice. "I've seen this kind before," he said. "They show up in nice cars, apologize like they mean it, make you feel like they're on your side. Then they hand you a stack of papers to sign and you end up with nothing." I told him Celeste hadn't asked me to sign anything. Leon just looked at me for a second. Not yet. I wasn't angry at him. I had the same thought every time her car turned onto the street. What kept me from telling her to stop coming wasn't her sincerity. Sincerity can be performed. What held me there were the details she knew without being told. She knew the exact date I had submitted the report. She knew the name of the city engineer who had asked for an independent review. She even knew about the phone call the project manager made to me 2 days after I kept pushing. Details that had never appeared in any newspaper. On the 4th visit, I decided to tell her everything. I started with the morning I found the cracks and worked forward. I described the way the project manager refused to show me the internal review. I told her how the company system had deleted every trace of my submission, even though I still had screenshots on an old phone. I described the night I came home and found the drawer where I kept the East Vale file had been opened. Nothing else was missing. I told her about the months of interviews that went nowhere. Places that said yes and then called the next day to say they had reconsidered. Places that told me straight out they didn't want trouble with Roar Meridian. Places that suggested I should change fields and stop talking about the accident. Finally, I told her about Alina. I didn't give her the worst parts. I didn't describe the nights Alina sat at the kitchen table trying to split one pill in half because we couldn't afford the next dose. I didn't repeat the evening she apologized to me for being sick, as if her body had done it on purpose to cost us money. I only said that when I lost the job, we lost the insurance, and that 14 months later, she was gone. Celeste didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say her father hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She just sat on the step below mine and listened until I finished. When I stopped, she said quietly, "My father read your report. He knew exactly what you had found. He still chose to keep building." I had suspected that for 6 years. Hearing it confirmed by his daughter felt different. I asked what she wanted from me. "I want to know what you want to happen," she said. "This is your story. I won't release anything unless you say yes." It was the first time she had given the decision to me instead of telling me what she planned to do to help. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a collection agency called Meridian Recovery Associates. It claimed I still owed $14,000 in administrative costs related to the East Vale investigation. If I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my house. I knew the debt was fake. I also knew it wasn't a coincidence. I called Celeste from the backyard. After I read the letter to her, she said immediately that no such fees had ever existed and that her own lawyers could have it withdrawn within a week. I refused. My voice came out harder than I intended. "I don't want you using Roar money or Roar lawyers to protect me from a threat that Roar people created." She went quiet on the other end. I kept going. "If you pay that bill, every time I look at this house, I'll remember it was saved by money that came from the same place that took everything else from me. I can't live like that." She didn't try to argue. "All right," she said. "I won't touch it unless you tell me to." The letter changed something. Before it arrived, I had still been treating the idea of reopening the case as something I might consider. After the letter, I understood that someone inside Roar Meridian already knew Celeste was meeting with me and had decided to use my house as leverage. I started pulling back. In the visits that followed, I answered only what she asked. I didn't offer new details. I didn't let the conversations run long. Eventually, I told her straight out that I was done. "You can lose the company and start over somewhere else," I said. "You have money and connections and a name everyone recognizes. I don't have a next chapter. I only have this house and whatever reputation I have left." Celeste didn't promise that everything would work out. She only said, "I know the risks aren't equal for us." The honesty in that answer bothered me more than any empty reassurance would have. 2 days later, I called her and told her I wouldn't go forward. She stood at the bottom of the steps and didn't argue. I said I believed she genuinely wanted to make things right, but good intentions and the ability to actually do it were two different things. I had already lost everything once by believing the system would protect someone who did the right thing. She nodded. Before she left, she said, "I respect your decision." I watched her car pull away from Maple Row and thought that was the end of it. That night, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. I sat alone in front of the wooden box that held Alina's things, her wedding ring, a few photographs, the letters she had written when we were still dating, and the small notebook she used to track her medication schedule. Between the pages, I found an old hospital bill. On the back in her handwriting were a few lines she must have written during one of the long waits between appointments. "Dorian still thinks he failed because he couldn't save me. But what hurts me most isn't the sickness. It's watching him start to believe that doing the right thing doesn't matter anymore." I sat there for a long time without moving. Only then did I understand the last thing she had said to me in the hospital. She hadn't asked me to keep fighting for her. She had only been afraid that what Victor Rohr did to me would turn me into someone who chose silence just to stay safe. I had spent 5 years telling myself I was protecting what little I had left. The truth was, I had let fear make every decision for me. If I stayed silent now, Victor Rohr would still win, even though he was already dead. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Celeste. "Don't leave, please." 40 minutes later, her car pulled up again. I was still sitting on the top step with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Celeste got out carrying a larger bag this time. She didn't ask why I had changed my mind. She just came up the walkway and sat on the step below mine like she had every other evening that week. I looked at her. "Show me everything," I said. "Don't hold anything back." She opened the bag and took out a thick envelope, a small USB drive, and 2 folders. The first folder contained the independent structural assessment that had been done by a city engineer 14 days before the scaffolding collapse. Every conclusion matched what I had warned about. The 3 load-bearing piers showed abnormal deterioration. The concrete mix had not met the design specifications. The project should have been halted immediately for a full structural review. The second folder held a chain of internal emails between Victor Rohr and Warren Keene, the company's general counsel. They discussed how to control the investigation, which people on the safety board could be influenced, and how to position me as the person responsible. I read every page twice. Then Celeste set a small portable speaker on the step between us. She said one of the files on the USB had come from a hard drive inside the safe. She didn't know why her father had recorded the call, but the forensic expert had confirmed the audio had not been edited. She pressed play. Victor Rohr's voice filled the quiet street. He was speaking with Brett Calloway, the project manager, 4 days before the accident. Brett mentioned my report and said he was worried I had already sent it to the safety board. Victor answered that it had been handled. He told Brett to keep the schedule moving and, if anything went wrong, to record the cause as equipment failure. Then he said clearly, "The safety engineer's report does not exist on official records, so no one can cite it." The recording ended. I sat without moving for a long time. For 6 years, there had been a part of me that kept wondering if I had missed something. Maybe the cracks weren't as serious as I thought. Maybe the way I had sent the warnings hadn't been correct. Maybe if I had been stronger or more experienced, the accident would never have happened. The recording removed every one of those doubts. Victor Rohr had heard the warning. He had known I was right. He had deliberately erased me from the record to protect the schedule and the money. I looked at Celeste. "He didn't just ignore it," I said. "He chose me to take the blame." "Yes," she answered. She didn't try to defend him. I asked what would happen to her if these things became public. She said the board could suspend or fire her. The company would try to claim the documents were incomplete or taken out of context. Warren Keene would probably use the full legal resources of Rohr Meridian to fight back. "Then why are you still doing this?" I asked. Celeste looked straight at me. "Because if I stay silent now that I know the truth, I won't be any different from my father in the only way that matters." I didn't answer right away. That was the same thing I had just realized about myself. I told her I needed 3 days. During those 3 days, I went to work like usual. I fixed pipes and checked heating systems and replaced a roof section on a house at the end of the block. Every night, I read through the report again and listened to the recording. I also went to the cemetery to visit Alina. I sat in front of her headstone and told her everything, even though I knew no one was going to answer. I admitted I was scared. Not of being called a liar again. I was used to that. I was scared of hoping and then being crushed a second time. But before I left the cemetery, I understood that I could not spend the rest of my life protecting this house by living inside a lie. On the morning of the 3rd day, I called Celeste. "We're going to do it," I said. "But we have to do it the right way." I didn't want a carefully worded corporate statement written by a PR team. I didn't want the story to appear only inside a 1,000-page court filing that no one would ever read. I wanted a public press conference where every piece of evidence was presented at the same time so no one could quietly take it back or edit it later. Celeste agreed. She hired an independent media lawyer only to make sure we didn't accidentally violate any rules that could get the evidence thrown out. She promised the lawyer would not write our statements for us. In the days leading up to the press conference, we met often. For the first time, I saw what was behind her usual calm. One afternoon, her phone kept buzzing. I asked what was happening. She said the board had found out she was holding the documents and had demanded she turn everything over. Warren Keene had warned her that if she continued, she would be removed as CEO before the press conference even happened. I told her she didn't have to destroy her own life to fix mine. Celeste shook her head. "I'm not doing this only for you," she said. "I'm deciding what kind of person I'm going to be after I inherited everything from my father." I started seeing her differently after that. Not because she was a rich heiress coming to save me. I hated that idea. I saw a woman who was choosing to give up the safest place she had ever known because she refused to keep living on top of a lie. There was still no love between us. But for the first time, I believed her. The press conference was held in a downtown hotel. There was no Roar Meridian logo anywhere. No banners, no corporate colors, no company spokesperson. 14 reporters came in person. 3 local television stations set up cameras. A few investigative journalists joined by video link. I arrived early and sat in the back row near the exit. I had thought about wearing the old suit I used for Alina's funeral, but in the end, I chose a dark blue shirt and a plain jacket. I didn't want to look like someone asking for pity. I only wanted to be seen as an engineer who had done his job. Celeste walked to the front without any notes. She began by saying her father had died and that she had found the East Vale file inside a hidden safe. She laid out my original report, the independent structural assessment, and the chain of internal emails. Then she played the recording. When Victor Rohr's voice came through the speakers, the room went completely still. I watched the reporters start writing faster. One of them turned to the person next to him with a look of disbelief. Another immediately checked his phone, probably sending the story back to the newsroom. Celeste didn't call what her father did a mistake or a miscalculation. She said it plainly. Victor Rohr read the report. He understood the risk. He still chose to bury it in order to protect the schedule and the company's financial interests. Then she said my name. Damian Price did his job. He identified the danger, documented it thoroughly, and sent warnings through every official channel available. His records were deliberately erased so that one individual could be made to carry the blame for people who held more power. When she finished, a reporter asked if I wanted to speak. I stood up. The walk from the back row to the front felt longer than any road I had ever traveled. I stood beside Celeste and looked at the cameras. "I did my job," I said. "I found the problem, wrote the report, and sent warnings through every channel I could use. What happened afterward was not my failure." I paused to keep my voice steady. "I have carried a name that didn't belong to me for 6 years. I'm not standing here to ask for sympathy or revenge. I only want the record to show what actually happened." Another reporter asked if I planned to sue the company. I said any legal decision would come later. What mattered right now was stopping them from continuing to call a deliberate cover-up an administrative error. After the press conference, everything moved quickly. Roar Meridian released a statement claiming the documents had been selectively presented and that the recording had not been verified. That same evening, Warren Keene appeared on television. For 8 minutes, he kept saying the public needed to understand the full context, but the evidence had already been downloaded and shared everywhere. Within 48 hours, 3 independent audio experts confirmed the recording was authentic. 2 former Roar Meridian employees contacted the press on their own. One had worked in records management and admitted he had been ordered to delete files related to my warnings. The other provided emails proving the safety board had received my certified letter and then marked it as undeliverable. The story stopped being local. A state oversight committee announced it was reopening the East Vale investigation and looking into 3 other Roar Meridian projects. Warren Keene hired his own lawyers. 2 board members resigned. Celeste was suspended as CEO. I only found out when I saw her name in the news that night. I called her immediately. "Are you all right?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I knew this would happen. Knowing doesn't make it hurt less. For the first time, she didn't try to sound strong. She admitted that her whole life had been prepared for her to take over the company. Now, the same people who had congratulated her were treating her like a traitor. I told her she hadn't betrayed the company. She had only refused to protect something that was wrong. Celeste gave a small, tired laugh. "You're the last person who should be comforting me. I'm not comforting you because you carry the name Roar," I said. I'm talking to Celeste. After that call, the last distance between us began to change. 6 weeks after the press conference, my certification was officially restored. The letter stated that the previous suspension had been based on falsified records. The $14,000 debt was canceled. The lien request on my house disappeared without me having to pay anything. A mid-sized construction company sent me a job offer. The letter from the director said they had read my original report. They wanted someone like me in charge of safety for their projects. I read that sentence many times. 6 years earlier, one company had closed every door in front of me. Now one old report was opening them again. I accepted the position as senior safety consultant. The first person I called on the day I signed the contract was Celeste. She was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Alina would have been very proud of you." I didn't ask how she knew my wife's name. Maybe I had mentioned it during one of our conversations on the porch. Maybe she had read it in the files. What mattered was that she didn't say Alina would be proud because I had won. She said Alina would be proud because I had gone back to the work I once loved. I looked out the window of my new office and, for the first time in many years, let myself believe that my life had not ended at 30. 3 months after the press conference, Celeste formally resigned from Roar Meridian. She could have waited for the board to fire her and collected a large severance package, but she chose to leave on her own terms. In a short statement sent to the press, she wrote that she could not inherit what her father had built without also accepting responsibility for how he had built it. She used part of her personal money to create the East Vale Labor Fund. It supported workers who had been injured, lost their jobs, or faced retaliation after speaking up about safety problems on Roar Meridian projects. She did not name the fund after herself or after her father. She told me over the phone that the bridge where everything had started should not be erased from memory just because it was connected to something shameful. After that, she started a small consulting firm focused on community development projects. Every contract required independent safety oversight and a clear channel for workers to report problems without fear of retaliation. She asked if I would help design the safety procedures for the first project, a community center in Eastbrook, about 3 kilometers from Maple Row. At first, I said no. I was afraid of falling back into a situation where I owed her something. Celeste didn't argue. She simply placed a standard employment contract on the table in front of me and said, "I'm not offering you help. I'm hiring a capable engineer. If you don't think the terms are fair, have a lawyer look at them." I realized she had finally understood what I had been trying to say all along. I didn't need to be saved. I needed to be treated fairly. I signed the contract. Over the next 4 months of working together, our relationship changed slowly. We still argued. I thought she pushed the schedule too hard. She said I was too cautious because I always prepared for the worst possible outcome. One afternoon, we spent nearly an hour debating whether she could switch material suppliers at the last minute. But unlike every boss I had worked for before, Celeste always asked for my full explanation and then actually listened. If I could prove a decision would create a safety risk, she would stop, even if it delayed the project or cost more money. One evening after we finished inspecting the site, we ate at a small restaurant near Maple Row. Celeste asked why I was still living in the old house, even though my new job paid enough for me to move somewhere better. I told her it was the last place Alina and I had lived together. "You're not ready to leave yet," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe you think leaving the house would mean leaving her behind." I looked at her. No one had ever asked me that before. I admitted that part of me was afraid that if I changed too much, the memories of Alina would start to fade. Celeste didn't tell me I had to move on. She only said quietly, "The love you had for her isn't inside those walls." That conversation made me understand that what I felt for Celeste was no longer just gratitude or respect. I didn't love her because she had fixed my record. I didn't see her as a replacement for Alina. I loved the courage it took for her to look straight at her own family's wrongdoing. I loved that she never made promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I loved that she had been willing to lose an empire rather than live comfortably on silence. But I didn't say any of that yet. I was still afraid the feeling would be mistaken for dependence between someone who had been helped and the person who helped them. I waited until the community center was finished, until our contract ended, and until neither of us had any professional obligation to the other. The opening ceremony was held on a clear morning in early spring. There was no big stage, only local residents, a few reporters, and the workers who had actually built the place. I walked through the building one last time, checking the foundation, the exits, and the fire alarm system out of habit. Celeste stood outside the main doors watching children from the neighborhood run into the new activity room. I walked over to her. She smiled and asked, "How many times have you checked it already?" "4. And it's safe?" "Yes." Celeste's smile faded a little. "So, the debt has been paid?" I looked at the building in front of us and shook my head. "Some debts can't be paid in full. You can't give me back the years I lost. No one can bring Alina back." She didn't say anything. I continued, "But you stopped making me carry that debt for your father. For me, that's enough to start from." Celeste looked at me for a long time. I took a breath and said what I had been holding for months. "The contract between us is finished. You're no longer my employer, and I'm no longer someone you need to compensate. So I want to ask you something as Damien, not as the victim of East Vale." She waited. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? No talk about the company, the press, or your father. Just a date." She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" I understood what she was really asking. She was afraid I was confusing gratitude with something else. I had been afraid of the same thing. I said, "I don't know what the future looks like, but I know this feeling isn't a debt. I'm not asking because you saved me. I'm asking because after everything, I still want to know who you are when you're not fighting anyone." Celeste smiled then, without the tension she had carried the first day she stood on my porch. "Then I accept." We walked into the community center together. I had once thought that justice would feel like victory. When my name was finally returned to me, I didn't feel like I had defeated anyone. I only felt that the ground under my feet had finally become level again. Victor Rohr had used power to turn truth into a lie. Celeste had used the power she inherited to expose that lie, even though it cost her everything that power had given her. And I had chosen between the safety of silence and the risk of speaking. We couldn't rewrite the past, but we could make sure the past no longer decided who we became. Some debts can't be settled with money. They can only be repaid with truth, responsibility, and the courage of people willing to lose something in order to do what is right.